Welcome back to part 2 of our Women in Preservation Safekeeping Tomorrow seminar. My name is Janice Ellis, and I'm a senior book and paper conservator at the National Museum of American History. And I'll be acting as your moderator for the next hour or so. I'm going to be leading a conversation with 4 really accomplished and lovely women, all of whom work in the preservation field, and mostly in settings that are actually somewhat different than my setting and the setting of the conservators this morning, who work indoors, mostly in conservation laboratories. These are women who work essentially in the preservation of buildings and archaeological sites. So it's a different environment. We've prepared small introductory videos of ourselves and our work for your enjoyment. We'll play all 4 of the videos, and then afterwards we'll begin our discussion. Following that, there'll be a discussion on the Jefferson Bible. So the technicalities of my profession in particular will be discussed there. So my videos are a little more informal and fun. Anyway, I hope you enjoy them, and I'll see you on the other side of the videos.
Hello, I'm Janice Ellis, the Senior Book and Paper Conservator at the National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian. I've been asked to tell you a little bit about myself. Whether sewing for my dolls at age 7 or making a wreath from my pet's molted feathers, I've always been a maker. I like finding beauty in detail and the physical manifestation of ideas, design, problem solving, craft, the tactile, hold it in my hands understanding of beauty. I like asking, how was this made? Oddly enough, my undergraduate degree was not in fine art, but in business administration and art history. I did an academic internship at an auction house in New York City and wrote a thesis on art as an investment. After graduation, though, I passed on the auction house job offer for one as a conservation technician in the book conservation laboratory at the New York Public Library and found my calling. I learned primarily at the bench, working one-on-one with conservators there, until a professor from the graduate program at Columbia University touring the lab took me aside and said, "What makes you think you're so special that you don't need the master's degree that all of these other people have gotten?" With that, he set me up for my future. I did my chemistry coursework, applied and gratefully accepted a full scholarship to attend the conservation graduate program at Columbia. There I completed an internship under Tony Keynes at Trinity College in Dublin and worked another internship in Spain in the 9th century castle owned by the cousin of King Juan Carlos. In what can only be described as a continuation of my fabulously dumb luck, my first job out of graduate school was at the Smithsonian. And besides a 10-year private practice hiatus when my 2 kids were really young, I've been there ever since. My boss at the American History Museum likes to remind me that when I interviewed for the job, I put my forehead down on the table and explained that I always wanted to work here. And here's why. Who gets to see inside the Lincoln hat left at Ford's Theater on the night he was assassinated, and to work inside it to mend the lining paper? Or to look inside the mouth of Jim Henson's original Kermit to see the repurposed red-painted soles of his mother's shoes and the green fabric of her old overcoat? How great is it when it's your job to figure out how to make invisible mends on currency notes that are intricately printed on both sides? Well, you design your own tools. Have a surgical tool-making manufacturing firm make them for you, and then do the work under the microscope. How do you photograph, survey, and treat circus posters that are larger than your laboratory? How do you hang them? Teamwork on a grand scale. How loudly will your colleagues allow you to play Jimi Hendrix when you're treating Can You Pass the Acid Test, the signboard that traveled on the original hippie bus further? The answer is pretty loud. How cool is it to get an invitation for your kids and their friends to take a selfie with the digital image of the first selfie ever made? Or to work on a daguerreotype portrait of Louis Daguerre? Or to see a Stradivarius violin this close? Or John Coltrane's A Love Supreme? Or to see paper that came over on the Mayflower? Or to rehouse the entire collection of Avedon photographs, including the exquisite Kennedy portraits? Or to see that Mr. Rogers' iconic sweater was hand-knit by his mom? Or to have amazing interns to mentor, colleagues to work and play with, and associates to collaborate with? It is seriously amazing.
I am Ariana Makau. I'm the owner and principal conservator of Nzilani Glass Conservation. For a long time, I said, I want to be sure that I'm involved in everything really intimately. And so I have to keep the company small. And the company was sort of like stretching all the time, saying like, I would like to be bigger and I will function better and you'll have more projects and you'll be less stressed out if you let me be bigger. And I kept on saying, no, I want to take care of everything. And, it's almost like, raising a child. At some point, you got to just let it be what it's going to be. So yes, I'm involved in every project, but I may not install every window. I have chosen to let my company tell me what it wants to do.
Hello, my name is Lindsay Jones, and I am the owner and principal conservator of Blind Eye Restoration. I have been doing construction for as long as I can remember. I basically went to work with my dad when I was too old for latchkey. I went to school for architecture, construction management, art history, worked at Habitat for Humanity, ended up managing multi-million-dollar redevelopment projects. And in the end, I just realized that what I really loved doing was working on historic buildings and teaching other people about it, which is when I knew that being an architectural conservator or conservation contractor was where I belonged. And there just didn't happen to be anything like that where I was at the time. So I formed Blind Eye Restoration. We are a historic architecture and public art restoration firm located in Columbus, Ohio. We work on anything from wood and steel windows and doors, bronze monumental doors, decorative plaster, decorative moldings, decorative painting, historic wallpapers, mosaics, whatever you can think of. We try to stay away from structural for the time being. We just don't have a big enough crew. But for the things that we can't personally do, that we can only take so much, we do offer consulting and project management services, just because with historic buildings, in order to maintain any part of it, you really have to understand the system as a whole. So we try to offer all-inclusive services so that we can help the client really make sure that the building is working as a unit. I didn't think too much of starting my business or being a woman-owned construction business when I began, but as I've gone along, I've realized that, all 95% of the women who apply for jobs with me, people who apply for jobs for me are women. 70% of the people who follow me on social media are women. Just by being a woman in a construction company and showing images of women working in construction on these job sites, we've created a space that allows women to imagine themselves doing this kind of work. And I love offering that opportunity for the women on my crew. And I want to continue to honor that space outside of my company because I can't hire and train everybody. But for those who are interested in the trades, we try to offer classes and education and just answering questions whenever anybody's interested. So a big part of our company leans into education. We do workshops, speaking, advocating, just by being able to get out into the community and offer these opportunities for local nonprofit organizations, doing sash mobs, lectures for homeowners on how to fix up their own homes. we are bettering our community, helping advocate for the trades, and teaching about the inherently green aspects of preservation. For instance, our company, which last year we employed 5 people full-time at one point maximum, we saved an estimated 25.6 tons of waste from going into the landfill. And that's just things that we worked on that would have been immediately put into a dumpster. That doesn't necessarily count any of the work that we did that was continuing maintenance for things that, if not maintained in another 15 years, would have gone into the garbage. So in 1 year, 25.6 tons, equivalent to essentially resurrecting an 1,100 square foot home from the dump. So we're pretty proud of that, and I love giving that kind of information to people through our outward-facing educational components. So we really love that we get to do this. I mean, I have created the company that I always wanted to work for. I try to encourage my girls to let me know whenever there's anything that would make this work environment better. We want to make sure that everybody's happy and encouraged at all times. And we really just try to focus on maintaining historic integrity in everything we do, high quality craftsmanship in all of our projects, making sure the clients are happy with our final product, and sharing our knowledge and resources with clients and the general public as we go along to increase preservation awareness and bettering our community. I really love that I get to do what I love and feel good about my company at the same time. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Katherine Ridgway, and I'm the State Archaeological Conservator for the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. Before we start our discussion, I thought I would give you some insight into my background. I received my undergraduate degree at the College of William and Mary, earning a double major in anthropology and classical studies. After taking a year off from school, I was accepted into the Durham University Master's Degree Program for Conservation of Historic Objects. This degree focused on the conservation of archaeological materials. While I was still at William & Mary, I started volunteering at Colonial Williamsburg, where I worked in the Archaeological Conservation Lab. During my year off, I worked at CW as a conservation technician, caring for antiques in buildings such as Weatherburn's Tavern, shown here, while continuing to work at the Archaeological Conservation Lab. While in graduate school, I spent an internship year at the National Museums of Scotland in Edinburgh. There I worked on many artifacts, including the Dunkeld lectern, which had a very colorful history, even being kidnapped by Scottish terrorists at one point. After graduation, I was lucky to get a position as the assistant conservator at the Field Museum. Among other things, I was in charge of loans conservation. This meant that I was able to courier artifacts around the world and work with numerous organizations and a wide variety of collections, both archaeological and ethnographic. After the Field Museum, I returned to my home state of Virginia and became the Fine and Decorative Arts Conservator for George Washington's Mount Vernon. I worked on a great number of George Washington artifacts, including this French triptych made of ivory and the weather vane on top of the mansion. My current position as the State Archaeological Conservator allows me to branch out from George Washington to treat artifacts from the entire history of the land now called the Commonwealth of Virginia. This usually consists of artifacts from the earliest Native American sites in Virginia to artifacts from the 1940s, but almost always they are from archaeological sites. This includes a lot of iron artifacts, live ordnance and other archaeological hazards, and Native American pottery. More recently, this has included working with state agencies on the potential removal of the Lee Monument from Monument Avenue and other issues of contested monuments from around the state. A great deal of what I do now is working with the public and institutions around the Commonwealth to answer their conservation and preservation questions. Besides my normal job duties, we are also encouraged to do professional service. For me, this includes being the president of the Virginia Conservation Association. I teach at the University of Mary Washington. I'm a member of the Council of Virginia Archaeologists and the Archaeological Society of Virginia. And I'm a fellow in the American Institute for Conservation, who serves on the Health and Safety Committee and was a member of the Contested Monuments Working Group. Hopefully this gives you a sense of my background and what I can add to this conversation today.
Thank you so much for playing those videos and giving us that introduction to all of us. I guess the first thing that I have to just address is the elephant in the room. And that is, how, ladies, does it feel to be the only woman on a construction site in a profession that's largely dominated by men? And how does your subject expertise translate to those that you work with who may be more trade trained than academic trained? Lindsay, do you want to start with that?
My experience in the field has been very different from my academic experience. Even just a couple of years ago, before I started my company, I might have said, I see it, but I've, for the most part, gotten by and gotten along with everybody that I run into. Everybody tends to be respectful when you come on a job site. But as soon as I became part of the workers on the job site and I wasn't wearing, I don't think I ever wore a suit jacket, but wasn't in that kind of, presentation. If I show up in Carhartts ready to take windows out or work on anything on site, it's kind of an interesting conversation because it opens up everything I do to discussion, conversation. It seems like any big project that I've had more serious discussion about what my place is on the job site with the GCs or whoever. My academic background is not.
You mean?
Oh, sorry. The general contractor. Okay. Yeah. Usually the person who's doing the project management of the site.
Yeah.
So we do it periodically. I've been in that position myself, but more often than not, we are a subcontractor on larger jobs.
Okay.
So we're part of their schedule and we tend to go to them to talk about different phases of the work.
Yeah.
But I have found that once you have a discussion with a lot of people and you go through your work, you just go through the phases, and generally people will learn to respect you. Nobody cares about your academic background. It is more about your ability to confidently stand in front of them, explain what you're doing, explain why you're right, potentially, if there's any question, and just sort of stand your ground. And I won't say that I haven't gained anything from my academic background, obviously, but there's been a lot that I just learned by being present. And I think that most of my employees not having preservation or conservation backgrounds have learned that as well, that they can stand their ground on these sites so long as they are understanding what they're talking about. They've had their hands on these things. They understand the reasoning behind what we're doing there on site and the importance of the different phases. And I think it's worked out really well, just teaching everybody to have that confidence and understanding.
Yeah. I found in my past when I worked with people who were strictly trained, they really thought that there was only one way to do things, and that was the way that their master taught them. And the option of looking at various options and having a discussion and then choosing an option was something that was brand new to them. And it seemed like it would start out as maybe you don't know the answer. And it was a negative. And when in fact it was a positive, when you knew more than one potential solution.
Mm-hmm.
Can anybody else speak to addressing whether you problem solve on the fly with at a job site, seeing various options, or do you go in with like a flat out, this is the way we're going to do it?
I can speak to that. I don't think I've ever gone into a job site with a very rigid approach as to there's only one way to do this. Of course, with over 20 years of experience under my belt, I have I have references in which I can use. But I think if you come in with that attitude and people are already perceiving you potentially as the other rather than us, you're not going to move forward if you're working at a large job site. So I always approach a job with an open mind and assume that I'm on the same level as the GC and, you know, the electrician and the head of scaffolding and the, you know, the masons and carpenters. And then if I get any pushback, then, you know, dropping that I have a master's in stained glass conservation, as Lindsay said, it'll just, no one cares. But if I talk about other projects that I've worked on and, you know, start talking about the different tools that I like and how I would approach it and, you know, engage other people in a discussion as to how can we all work together, how can we collaborate to move this project forward, there tends to be a little bit more equilibrium. I've also sort of had, and I'm interested to hear from the rest of the group, something that hasn't come up yet in our discussions where there's different trades that I've worked with over time for on numerous projects, and we sort of have this shorthand of a discussion. And then we go to look at a new job site, and the client may defer to the 250-pound, 6'7" scaffolding guy. Well, what are you going to do? And as an ally, the scaffolding guy says, well, you know, this is Ariana's job. I'm just putting up the scaffolding. Ask her.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's interesting to note and call out that we do have allies. And conversely, sometimes you'll have another woman on the job site who is trying to elevate herself and be heard and starts kind of bickering back and forth with you because in her perception, there's only room for one, whereas it doesn't need to be like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because I feel like because I'm 5'10" and just a bigger woman in general, I find that it helps with people taking me seriously in general. And I don't think about it that much, I guess. And I feel like I have fewer problems just because I'm tall, which is another interesting thing. It sort of helps me have a certain amount of command just by genetics. But I agree.
Big boots on track.
Right? Yeah, right. Wearing, yeah. And wearing clothing, like at an archaeological site, if I came in high heels and a skirt and everything, well, they shouldn't take me seriously because I'm not dressed appropriately for the work. And so, yeah, finding an archaeologist on site who has worked with conservators before, recognizes the value of what I have to add, and then can make them an ally really does help a lot. Yeah. But I will say there are some times when we were talking about approaching problems in different ways, but when I have a health and safety issue, that generally starts to limit my options, and then I tend to be more heavy-handed because at that point it's about the safety of the people on the site and not about anything else. So, but for the most part, yeah, I think that you have to be flexible about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Last week, we also talked about our roles basically as communicators and advocates and educators. And it's interesting to think about that because sometimes the expectations of the client are not the same expectations of the conservator. So there has to be a way to kind of communicate what is appropriate and what is feasible and what should not be done. because and especially in today's society, and for your profession, probably more than most, I think people expect things to look brand new. They want it to, they're investing all this money, they want it to look new. And one of my colleagues used to say that, you don't want to dress your grandmother in Madonna's clothing. You know what I mean? You don't want it to look like anything else but your grandmother. But so can you address, how you match the client's expectations with your work?
Yeah. I do think people have an unrealistic expectation of what archaeological conservation is supposed to accomplish. And so I think that starts at the beginning of the conversation with usually the people who are going to borrow it for an exhibition. I find that researchers aren't necessarily as interested in aesthetics. They're interested in being able to get whatever information it is that they're interested in. But for exhibits, I think it's about managing expectations and saying, look, our goal as archaeological conservators is to help people see that artifact as an artifact and not see the damage necessarily and focus on that. And so, and the idea that we can get it mostly together so you can tell it's a teacup or a bowl or anything like that, is the goal, not so that it's not just a bunch of fragments that people can't understand. And so I think you just start working with the people to help them understand that this is what we're going to be able to manage because this has been underground for 200 years or 10,000 years. And this is not a fine art object anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, and Ariana can attest to this too, there's different levels of restoration that we can offer to clients, specifically because a lot of them are private, where we're looking a little bit at budget, we're looking a little bit at condition, we're looking at the physical building needing to survive. So it's not really a matter of conserving the exact material so much as making sure that the place doesn't fall apart. There's also the idea of museum quality, which for us is you get to look at it from 3 feet away behind a velvet rope. You can't get up close with your eyeball right next to something and say, I can see your brush marks right here. Like, there's a difference. Do you want it to function? Do you want it to maintain that original, just kind of pulled it out of the ground, like Catherine's saying, look, for like to get all of that specific detail, or are we trying to just make it be a functional material in the world? So there's all sorts of different levels, and we have that conversation with clients all the time. Like almost every project we go out to, like, this is all the things we can do. What do you really want out of this? And here are the reasons why each one of these different options could work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always say to our clients, exactly what you said, Lindsay, is, if we're working, because we work for museums and we work for residences and monumental buildings. And so I'll say to a client who in their mind thinks, well, we want museum quality work. And I say, we could do that and put your window back in its location. But if you have water dripping in, you're not going to care anything about anything that we did to conserve your window. You're only going to care that water is dripping down into inside of your building. And so we have to weigh the approaches that we take within the context of where the windows are. So again, educating and bringing the client along and incorporating them into the treatment approach, I think is really paramount to a successful project, and also serves conservation. I think someone in the previous talk was saying, we just need to get more visibility on what conservation and preservation is. And part of that for me is, opening the doors, being really transparent about what we're doing, instead of, we're these glorified conservators who are very skilled at what we do, and we're going to take your precious object and we're going to work on it behind here in our studio, and then ta-da, look at how amazing it is.
Yeah.
And no one knows how much time it takes. No one knows all the steps that you're taking, even if it looks relatively similar before and after, like all the different levels that you got to, all the research you undertook to decide do nothing.
Right. That was going to be one of my next questions about.
Yeah. I think the more we're at the fore and the more we have a discourse about who's doing the work and why we do the work and why we arrived at our decision, can only serve preservation and our profession.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember in graduate school, having the opportunity to spend a day watching a scholar look at an artifact. And this was a gentleman named Michael Gullock, who looked at this ancient book and just engulfed it with his eyes. And by the end of the day, he could tell you, where the paper was made, where the book was bound, where it was printed, and what that means for trade and the movement of tradesmen and literacy. I mean, there was so much information that was just below the surface that you knew that by doing a conservation treatment, you would be interfering with a lot of that historic evidence. And you knew that there were some things that you just had to say, no, I'm not going to do that, because this is the amount of evidence that will be lost by me doing that. So I'm sure that as a person working in the trade and working with a client in a client relationship, the possibility of saying no is difficult, and it brings that education forward, that education initiative forward to create that shared conversation. So along those lines, I want to ask you about public outreach and mentorship. So how you bring that message forward. How were you mentored, or how do you like to be a mentor to others?
I can take that, and I'll be brief because I'm curious about Katherine as well. So I went the traditional educational route where, undergrad, internship, grad school, got my master's, worked at a couple museums, and then it seemed like I was on a pretty straight trajectory. And then after that, there were no full-time museum conservation jobs in stained glass conservation. And so I found a stained glass studio and offered my services as a conservator and worked there for a couple years. And I learned a lot. I was just like a sponge, because even though I had all this academic training, and this may be something that we want to talk about a little bit too, I had 8 hours in the 3 years in my master's program in running a business. 8 hours. And I think it's a really big disservice, because, these schools are churning out these amazing conservators who don't know how to balance a P&L. They don't know how to run QuickBooks. They don't, my first couple of years in my own business, I was doing all my accounting in Excel. So I did learn a lot from that studio that I was in, and eventually realized, I can serve all of these different interests. I love working in museums. I love working on projects in museums, but I also love working in the field. So I started my own company. And to that end, we've had about 30 or 40 employees go through in the last 18 years that we've been in business. And people always say, well, where do you find the skilled labor? And I say, there's tons of skilled labor out there. It's just not necessarily coming directly from grad schools or even college.
Right.
I can think of a certain person that we have in the studio right now who, for a while I was saying you're a conservator in everything but name only. And no, I'm self-correcting. She is a conservator. She just has come about it in a different way. But the way she looks at objects, the way she documents things, the meticulousness of patience of piecing things together, it checks all the boxes, except there's no diploma. And does that piece of paper really matter when a client is like, I love the work that has been done? No, in my opinion, I don't think so. Yeah. So, being able to mentor people like that and seeing them grow into an amazing conservator, and the very small confines of what a conservator is great. And also everyone else who's picking up conservation as well as the hands-on work is great. And then mentor, I think mentor is both ways. I think someone else was saying this maybe the first day. I learned so much from other people. I've learned so much from the first 2 days of this conference. Yeah. Just constantly learning. And now I'll be quiet because I want to hear. I could talk about this for ages, but we only have less than an hour. So,
Kate, what do you think?
So when I was younger, I wanted to be a paleontologist, and then I thought, oh, there's no money in that. I'll go into archaeology because apparently I was a dumb child. And so I started taking archaeology classes in William & Mary, and I did my first field school, and I thought, oh, I really hate field work. And Dr. Emily Williams, who was the archaeological conservator for Colonial Williamsburg, came onto the site to do some work, and I saw what she was doing, and then I just glommed onto her. I was like, this looks fascinating. This looks like the part of archaeology I want to be a part of. And she's been my mentor ever since. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And so I got into it a little late in the game, which meant I was catching up on my chemistry and catching up on things. And so I took a year off. I did some more work. And William & Mary was kind of difficult anyway. It was nice to take a break. And then I went the traditional route. And what I realized as sort of a grown-up conservator in my own lab is that the interns who are serious about conservation, I am brutally honest about how hard the job market is. Especially if you want to be specifically in archaeological conservation. And also I really encourage and try and get interns who are not interested in archaeological conservation, but are interested in archaeology, because I feel like if I get archaeologists in my lab to do an internship while they're in school, they, as full-fledged archaeologists, will have such a better understanding of any conservator they work with and why it takes so long to work on something and what a conservator can have to offer. And most importantly, why they shouldn't try it themselves. Right. And so that's the part I actually find more helpful, is not trying to train an archaeological conservator. I will train them. I love to train them. But it's more helpful for me to train future archaeologists, give them 3 months of this is what it's like to be the conservator on site, and then send them out to help others understand what I do.
I think establishing that shared vocabulary is absolutely vital.
And respecting their vocabulary, learning archaeology terms so I can speak to them.
Right.
And Lindsay is back.
Lindsay, we were talking about mentorship, and then you were so rudely interrupted. So you want to take two?
What happened? Yeah. So I really gained most of my experience from hands-on work, whether in the construction field or the conservation field. And I feel fully confident in bringing on new people, interns, employees, what have you, who have shown just an interest, a passion, a curiosity in what we do, and teaching them what I can in whatever amount of time they're with us. We cover a lot of areas, so there's always some oversight, but I feel like when you give somebody who has an interest in it an opportunity to actually work with their hands and see what's happening, like I think I'm probably reiterating everybody, the understanding that they gain, they can bring to other areas of their life. They can share with other people in their life so that the information gets shared just through all of the channels. So we're not just benefiting ourselves, the individuals that we're mentoring, but just sharing that information and making it available can be, beneficial for anyone. And I love learning hands-on. So anybody who comes to me is interested in learning hands-on. It's fantastic. And we try to offer internships whenever possible so that we can have students in who maybe not interested in sticking with preservation, but who can bring that information to other fields. We have a lot of art students. We have a printmaker and a jeweler and an interior designer working with us. And there's a history student, I believe, is somebody who's potentially coming to us this summer. And then a gentleman who is switching careers entirely and is interested in helping us out for a period of time as well while we're like in the summer rush. So we bring on all sorts of people, and I could not be more grateful for my experience. And I hope that I pass that excitement to people through.
Before we go into the Q&A, where a lot of people are asking about, lectures and outward facing education, I wanted to touch base again on the idea of entrepreneurship and the bravery it takes to make that leap and to hire staff and to run a business. And none of this is addressed in conservation school and conservation programs. And I feel like there are so many talented people out there that are sort of waiting for a position to be handed to them rather than grabbing a position and making it for themselves. So I want to ask you about entrepreneurship and how you learned what you have created for your business.
I gave this statement out recently saying it takes a lot of ignorance paired with ambition. Because if I had known how difficult it is, I don't know if I would have done it. But also to echo what some other women were saying earlier in the conference, people should know that it's not a straight trajectory either. At least it hasn't been in my experience, jumping around working in museums and then working on smaller projects. And then, I think Lindsay could probably speak to this as well, because we're project-based. It's sort of like there's a small project and I was a couple small projects and I worked on them, and then things got bigger. And so I needed help. So I brought in other people, and then you're sort of building the plane as you're flying it. And then you just sort of self-educate by taking, management classes and business classes and that kind of thing. But I think conservators or people who are interested in preservation and conservation, there is a gap missing for, something that's coalesced, that's preservation-based business classes or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, having that also sort of helps you launch your career into upper management if you are in an institutional setting as well, so that people don't think you're just strictly single object focused, that you have a larger focus as well on how to run a business or an institute, or part of an institution or a department or whatever. I think it's important to have that skill set as well. I wish conservation programs would introduce that concept.
I'd like to hear from both Kate and Lindsay if you feel like you were naturally born as entrepreneurs or you did it by default, and if you like it now. And was there a learning curve in sort of owning the fact that you're also business women?
I'm going to defer to Lindsay because I'm not an entrepreneur. I have always hidden in organizational labs. So I am a give me a bomb any day, but ask me to be in private practice, and I will cower under my desk. So this is really a question for Lindsay.
I didn't really want to be in business for myself. My dad has a construction company, or had a small home repair construction company. I mentioned that I worked for him pretty much as soon as it was impossible to send me to daycare anymore. So I've seen how hard it was and how you have to be all of the places. And you have to have all of the tools and be prepared for every instance. And it's incredibly expensive and exhausting and time consuming. You can't work all day and then just expect jobs to show up tomorrow. You also have to be marketing and doing estimates and client calls and, material ordering, all the things. And growing was scary, but it's less scary or less tiring. I don't know. It makes sense to grow when you realize that there's just not enough hours in the day. So I started off on my own because I knew what I wanted to do personally, but it got to a point where I just couldn't handle it all personally. And I'm so glad that my right hand, Morgan, came along at just the right time. I maybe wasn't ready to hire her mentally, but it was time. And that's enabled me to continue growing and bring on more people and take on larger projects. And the large project aspect, because I've been on the other side of things, on the development, project management side, and working for architects and working for other larger versions of my own company, actually, as project management, helped a lot in putting a lot of this together. But there's constantly that learning curve and just always feeling like you're playing catch up. I have to learn about commercial property loans now, because I'm looking into buying a commercial shop and I don't know anything about it. No, because you have to find here at some point, because somebody's trying to hassle you and not pay you all your money. You have to get an accountant because, oh my gosh, I have to do taxes for 12 different cities this year. It's not something you can do alone. So you kind of, I don't want to say you're forced into it. I could have chosen to stay just
thrown into it.
You're thrown into it, and you just either you're okay growing and doing all of that and you just go with the flow, or you can stop it. And I think I've just ended up going with the flow, not necessarily because I was specifically talented at it. I think just because I haven't stopped is probably the best reason.
We should start with some of our Q&As because our participants are curious. The first question was, how can we attract more women into the field of construction and preservation?
We have to go out and talk to women who are interested in construction and preservation. Like I said, I've created a space that women who know about me find that this is an opportunity, but they don't hear about me until, they're already fully into a career, or they're worried about paying off student loans, and starting over from ground zero is tough. And so we should probably really just start getting more into the high school, elementary school, even third grade is when they talk about public community history, I think, and we can start talking about the history of our built environment around us and the objects that are specific to our community's history. Mm-hmm. We are currently talking with a local nonprofit and a public high school that does an arts and trades specific education component. And they do construction, but they don't do preservation. They also don't have any girls in the construction program. So I'm really hoping that potentially by participating in that and becoming an educator in that program, even just for a short period of time, that we can encourage more women to join that way. But you really just have to be a presence. You have to ask women to show up and make it an available option for them to show up, not just say, hey, you're 35 years old, want to change careers?
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's also, sorry, I think it's also about partly building confidence, which all of that will do, like giving women, especially women earlier in their careers, the confidence they need to do whatever it is they are interested in. And part of that is being good role models and showing them that other people are doing it already. So of course you can.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just being visible is, it may not seem like a lot, but it is so helpful. I use my children as Trojan horses. And so I started in preschool, going and talking to little kids about what I do, is 5 slides, 5 minutes, maybe. And I got, most of them were facing forward by the end of the talk. So that was great. But it was interesting. I'm very privileged to live in a location where many families haven't moved. And so now I have an end of elementary school age kid and a junior high kid. And I have kids coming up to me, a lot of them girls, like asking me about what I do or echoing back about health and safety of dealing with, stained glass. Like, I was looking at this house in our neighborhood and it has lead. And I went and told the people, be careful, there's dust there, So it's being present and saying and sharing where you work, sharing whenever I go into the schools and talk, and whatever age actually, also retired groups like to hear what I'm sure all of us do. I make a point of putting up a slide of what the team looks like and talking about the diversity of which is kind of, I wish I could find another word of it, but the diversity of the team that works for me. And I make a point, like, see that guy with dreadlocks who kind of looks like, I don't know, like a circus man or something, or because he has like these amazing white dreadlocks, and then there's a woman over there with green hair, and that person is tall, and that person is older, and that person is younger. And I always say it doesn't matter what shape or size or gender you come in. It's the curiosity, it's the interest in what we do that is important to us. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, just keeping that that open door and that open mind and that open conversation with your community.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an ivory tower. It is. It is an invitation for a conversation, and frankly, that's why you want to, keep these ancient objects vital, because they are the sources of conversations that reflect on a much larger scale than just what this thing is made of. There's entire layers of history and community that you're revealing, and that's the important part. And that's still, vital in our community today, talking about conservation and preservation. All right, so we're going to go to one more question, which is, how do you interact with your local government when you need to make changes to a historic structure? Do you approach them?
I can
approach you? Is it
start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, I work in state government, and we try to be a resource for local governments. We are able to help them, and we try to let them approach us, because we are that sort of larger entity, and we don't want to be seen as bullying people into making a decision that is not what their community needs. But we do know that we have access to resources that smaller communities may not have access to. So what we try and do is be a presence and be aware, make sure communities are aware of what we can offer them by going out into communities and giving lectures and things. But we don't try and force ourselves upon local communities if we can help it. So we just try and exist and make ourselves as approachable as possible as a state agency. I imagine that is very different for people working for their own companies.
Well, from my perspective, I think the time that we run into engaging with the local government is more in terms of advocacy and education. We don't technically, especially with what I do, we hardly even need to pull permits most of the time because it's considered maintenance. Mm-hmm. So I really don't have to do a lot of that. And mostly it's just saying, hey, we're here. Specifically, anybody who is part of a community that has historic requirements for the community, or if anybody is just unsure if what we're doing requires permissions, just basically introducing ourselves and what we do and what our plans are for our work tends to be enough. And then from advocacy, education, just introducing ourselves just so that more people are aware of who we are and what we're offering.
I think we have time for like one more very quick question is, what is something that you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Whoa. What did you say, Lindsay? Yeah, everything.
Everything. I think for me, I wish I had more preparation for I actually don't have as much of a problem working with HVAC and bomb squad and archaeologists as I do struggle speaking to people who are going to do the funding, people who are very high up in organizations, and trying to help them understand a specialty that is pretty far away from whatever it is that they're used to. And so I wish I had had more help in understanding how to be that sort of next stage of my career. Like, I feel like grad school helps you with your beginning stage, but then it's sort of like having that extra thing to help you with your business. Like that is what I kind of wish I had more of before I started, was how to effectively get the people above me to understand what it is that I need.
I think mine would be learn to speak up sooner. And there are some battles that you just can't win. I feel like I have a very tenacious spirit, and sometimes I'm just fighting to try to convince someone who will never be convinced that we are the best company for the job, because they can't see past this or see past the amazing team that is just not worth my time or energy to try to convince someone who's not going to believe that we are accomplished at what we do. Or the other side of it, and sort of speaks to one of the questions, to value your worth. And it's really hard when you're starting off, when you have to pay the bills, you have to pay your rent, you'd like to eat, you'd like to stay in a building and the building that you're in, to just say, I'm accomplished. You are asking me to do this job because you can't do it yourself. And if you're asking me to do that job, there is a monetary value attached to that. And if this is something that you, quote, could do yourself perhaps you can go try to do that yourself. And when you can't, you can come back to me and I will do it properly in a really nice way. But really, I think as women, and I really feel like this is changing for the better, but for my age group, it was really hard to articulate at the beginning, I'm not going to do this project unless my needs are met, or, okay, that's your opinion. I'm going to go work for someone who does value what I do. What about you, Lindsay?
I think you just about covered everything I was starting to think of. Yeah, trusting my own instincts, and when something doesn't feel right, just don't worry about it anymore. There's been a couple of jobs where they've tried to, bigger jobs that you look at them, you're like, this would be great, but they keep coming back asking for estimate changes or rewriting things out because management has changed and it's been like over a year process. I'm just like, maybe I don't need to be a part of this. Maybe you guys need to figure stuff out for yourself.
Yeah, learning to say no.
Yeah, or like speaking engagements like this, even, it took me a long time to feel really comfortable speaking in public about anything that I do, because I was afraid of either somebody calling me out for being inaccurate on something, questioning my ability, my background, my chosen practice, and whatever I was talking about. And I found that you can't make 100% of people happy. And that, for some reason, is the hardest lesson to learn.
Yeah.
I've run into somebody who's not 100% happy, just like frozen inside, but you learn to work past it and breathe through the stress, and like everything else in life is going great. The business is still rolling. Everything's fine. These little things can't trip you up anymore, and just continuing to move forward.
Yeah. I think learning how to build that shared vocabulary and building consensus, and teaching people that just because you're proposing to do something differently does not mean that they were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because then that builds sort of like a resistance in what, in your approach. If you're implying that they did something wrong in the past. So you just have to kind of, say this is an evolutionary process and we're moving forward. And building that consensus, I think, really helps. Anyway, surprisingly, we are totally out of time. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I hope our audience has as well. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We will try to answer offline as we can. There are links to our work not in the Q&A, but in the chat box. So if anyone in the audience would like to continue to follow our participants' careers, there's a means for you to do that. Thank you, ladies, so much. We could talk forever. I'm so grateful we had this chance to talk. And that is Ariana Makau from Nzilani Glass Conservation, Lindsay Jones from Blind Eye Restoration, and Katherine Ridgway from the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
My pleasure. We will take a very brief break. And then if the audience is so inclined, you can stick around and come back at 11:30, where we will talk about the conservation treatment of the Jefferson Bible at the National Museum of American History. See you soon.